Welcome back. Now, the IPO market has continued its downward spiral, easing from its 2021 highs. That's as financial markets have been experiencing volatility, mainly due to elevated interest rates. But now, as traders expect those rates to come down next year, that market might be in for a bumper 2024, with many eyeing the skims and Shein potential IPOs. And joining me now with greater insight is Senior Market Strategist at Oanda, Craig Erlam. Thank you so much for your time, Craig. Now, that IPO market experienced a downturn last year, and of course we know that the macroeconomic headwinds and subdued market sentiment has persisted in 2023. What has supply and demand in that IPO market looked like this year?
So it's been pretty weak. I mean, and it's understandable why, like you say, it's not necessarily just the kind of macro environment, which obviously is a massive influencing factor, but the level of uncertainty that's come with very high levels of inflation and interest rates. How do you price an IPO when interest rates are rising aggressively and you don't really know where they're going to end, when you don't know really where the S&P 500 is going to end the year? If you'd have asked someone 6 months ago, where will the S&P 500 be now? I don't think many would have positioned it where it has ended up. And also just the sheer volatility that you then have in the markets does create that uncertainty too. On top of that, when you do see firms that do IPO this year and you see the stock performance doesn't do particularly well and that appetite for them is relatively cool, it's not exactly inspiring private firms to go public unless they feel like they have to. So it has been a bit of a weak year in the IPO market, but we're ending the year in a very different place than we started. So I'm much more optimistic about 2024.
Yeah. Craig, it's a very interesting point that you mentioned there, that investors are asking themselves, how do you price an IPO? And I'm actually wondering, because we had that huge influx of IPOs in 2021. Do you think at that point those might have been too highly priced?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it differs from company to company, so you don't want to necessarily comment on them in a broad spectrum, but there is times when these markets are performing in a quite extraordinary way that you look at the way these IPOs are priced and you think it's extremely aggressive. But I mean, there was times, for example, late in the kind of like 2017 through 2020, when we were seeing IPOs and you were thinking, wow, that's quite the offering, and then you see how they perform for the 6, 12, 12 months after, 2 years after, and they've continued to perform very well. It's all relative, really, to the time that you're in and the appetite that there is in the market. And no one can predict the future, but I think, and at times that makes life a bit easier, like it did in 2018, 2019, but it makes it a lot harder in a year like 2023.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I also sense that there is some disappointment on some companies where they haven't lived up to the hype that investors expected in 2021 in terms of the earnings that they have produced. So, of course, now we know that there is, this forecast that we will probably get rate cuts as early as March next year. So, of course, you're bound to see a turnaround in investor sentiment there. And I'm wondering actually if we could start to get a huge influx of IPOs when we do see rate cuts, even before we see the full impact and benefit of those rate cuts filtering through to the real economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, you look at the environment now compared to 6 months ago, and it's vastly different. You're looking at rate cuts rather than rate hikes. You're looking at a more stable environment. And if you look at the performance of the S&P in the last month, it's been extraordinary. We look in a very different position now. So there is going to be many private companies who are going to be looking at this market, and they're going to be tempted again. They're going to be saying, do you know what? We've got really good valuations. We've got really promising prospects for the economy and for interest rates. So maybe now is the time to start planning for this IPO. I think it also depends on what space you're in, because things are looking very different, for example, in the consumer space than it is in tech space. If you're a firm in with some AI capability and prospects, then you may be looking at the IPO IPO market right now or in 12 months' time with a lot more optimism than you are in oil and gas or in consumer-facing industries, especially consumer, given the challenges that we're already seeing and have seen this year, and that's expected to continue into 2024. So it differs by sector as much as it does by year and by market as well.
Yeah, of course. Another interesting point there that you bring about, that some sectors could have more robust activity than others. And of course, we know the sentiment now that is led by that AI boom, but also the green energy transition. Just lastly, as we wrap up the conversation, Craig, I mean, it has been a difficult 2 years for the IPO market, and there'll, of course, be, this increased activity next year. I'm wondering if regulators should then be more relaxed on approving IPO application next year, or do you think that they will be stricter to safeguard the market interest, considering all the economic headwinds that we've faced?
Again, it probably depends on the industry, for it, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure if there's any crypto-related firms, for example, looking to IPO, then they may be taking a keen interest in what they have to offer. But there's other areas where they may be taking a more, not necessarily a more relaxed approach, but the same approach that they have taken in the past. I guess it's just also going to be a question of the sheer influx of IPOs that they are going to have to deal with when it comes to the speed with which they can actually get these over the line. But I think if I'm looking at the situation now, and I'm looking at the environment, and I'm looking at the how things have been, like you say, over the last couple of years, I think 2024 could certainly be busy.
Well, indeed, Craig, another one that we will be looking out for is that potential Shein IPO, as you do have some people in the law fraternity talking about blocking that IPO if the SEC approves it. Of course, we know that there has been a lot of noise on regulation there. But thank you so much for giving us insight on that IPO market. That was Senior Market Strategist at Oanda, Craig Erlam.